Well, thanks so much, Jonny, for making time for us today.
Thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure to meet you finally. Your first time in Malaysia.
It is my first time and it is hugely exciting, even though I am very, very tired. And I apologise for that now. The jet lag is quite something, but it's brilliant to be here.
I can imagine. Well, Jonny, you've been around for some time with the BBC.
Yeah.
Everyone knows who you are.
Well,
or at least people who watch the news, at least.
Maybe.
Right. So you're royal correspondent for the BBC News. You covered 9/11 from DC as a correspondent. You were Europe correspondent and the Middle East correspondent for the BBC. So I want to ask you, Jonny, what's been the highlight of your career so far?
Because it's very difficult to say. To be the royal correspondent of the national broadcaster on the death of Queen Elizabeth II was an astonishing moment and probably the most challenging work of my career. To be a junior reporter in Washington, D.C. on my first foreign posting when 9/11 happened is an astonishing moment, and all the periods in between as well, from elections to earthquakes and everything that happens in between. I don't tend to think of things in sort of, that was fantastic, that was not so good. It's more the insights that you get into human beings. It's being able to sit in people's front rooms across the world and talk to them about their lives and their thoughts and their losses. And that is the privilege of being a correspondent. So yes, there have been the great moments, but it's generally the day-to-day and talking to people about what they want and what they fear and what they hope for is actually the high point.
Right. And for this series in particular, the World Questions debate, what's the most interesting thing that's come out of this programme?
I mean, it's probably observing things which a lot of people talk about and know about, but you see firsthand when you have a live audience and a panel with you. And that in particular is about the rise of what is known in the West in particular as populism and populist political parties, about the dominance of some topics that come round and round again. And there you have obviously cost of living, which is been a huge issue for many years now, and can sometimes get lost in the grand talk of party politics, but actually is the key concern of so many people about the price of food, the price of housing, the price of transport, the price of energy, and then the environment as well, which again, wherever we go, whether it is sort of Mongolia or Milan, you have people with very deep concerns about their physical environment and very deep concerns about the cost of making things right and the cost of trying to improve the earth. So seeing those big ideas, which are talked about in sort of fancy journals and magazines, but seeing them come out in the questions from the audience is fantastic.
Do you find your role then, because the BBC World Debate series, it offers such a unique feature in that you are directly engaging with the members of the public through your question and answer session. Do you feel that you have that extra role of bridging the gap between the people who we should hold to account and the people who demand answers?
It's a really difficult balance, to be honest. I mean, it's the most difficult thing. I'm not there to start sort of shouting at politicians or telling them off. I mean, especially, to be honest, when I'm a guest in their country. And so there's an added sensitivity there. It's more about just trying to encourage them to speak openly and honestly to the questions that they've received. And sometimes it's important to pick people up. We were in Bengaluru in India a few months ago, and a representative of the governing party there said about one controversy, he said, show me the quotes, show me the actual quotes where we've said any of that stuff. And I had the quotes and I put those to them. But, my role is really to help the audience, I think, not to sort of hector the panel. I don't want to start shouting at the panel, and it's important to get that balance right.
Right.
I hope I get it right.
Well, we'll see tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll see tomorrow.
After the debate, which I'm going to move on to now. So with Malaysia, how does the West see what comes out of Malaysia, and how does the Western media pick which stories are newsworthy, or is it just about 1MDB lately? Because that seems to be the most widely known thing by everyone around the world about Malaysia.
Well, I mean, look, for me, I have to say that's probably not. I mean, 1MDB is a sort of sub-story of the Malaysian story, which I see as, largely a hugely successful economic story, a transformation in the country to what it is now, an upper middle income country. And for me, that is, when people say Malaysia, I think of economic success. And of course, there's going to be within that all kinds of challenges about inequality and corruption and pollution and all those kinds of things. But that's what I think of. I think of, and it's a clumsy cliche, I think of Asian tigers, and I think of potential and all that excitement. And yeah, of course, 1MDB was a big deal. And of course, international media focus on, failings and disasters and all kinds of things. But that is the benefit of coming here and seeing a successful country as well, seeing it with your own eyes. It is, it is astonishing to think of where someone like Malaysia was, when I was born a long time ago, and where it is now. And that, to me, that's the big story of Malaysia, with lots of other stories rippling around underneath. Right.
But I'm sure you find that there are still setbacks or maybe some barriers to covering news from, especially parts of the world like where we are. But for Malaysia in particular, what do you think, gets in the way a little bit for when you cover the news?
What gets in the way is, part of it is simply distance and the fact that people don't understand complicated countries like Malaysia with their complicated inheritances as well. There's no doubt about it. Most people do not get to scratch the surface of the country. Everything from colonial inheritance to sort of current day tensions. The challenges of geopolitics around here are formidable, and people, I think, on the other side of the world simply don't understand the balancing act that countries like Malaysia, the Philippines, and other nations in the region simply have to perform all the time. When countries are told you have to choose or something like that, it's a strange demand to make from 3,000 miles away. So, yes, ignorance is the main barrier when you're trying to talk about a country like Malaysia. But I hope that what we do a little bit for the world beyond with the debate is try and get through some of that ignorance and show that there are shades of grey everywhere. Right.
And overcoming that ignorance, I suppose, when we talk about the region here, ASEAN, it's coming out in full force right now, especially with Malaysia. We just chaired the ASEAN meeting, heads of government. What do you think of our Prime Minister Anwar, his stance, and the message that he's putting out there, especially in regards to how he's responding to the US and how he balances relations between the US and China? What's your take on that?
Look, I'm not dodging your question, but it really isn't my place to judge politicians or the stances they take. I would simply say this is a very complicated part of the world with lots of different things to balance. And it's up to, I think, the West to know a lot more about places like Malaysia before it judges places like Malaysia, and to know a lot more about the different stresses and strains and decisions and trade-offs that have to be made before people stomp in with their size 10 boots telling Malaysia what to do. Yeah.
And a little bit more about Anwar. He's gone through a lot through the decades, from being in prison, out of prison, and then Prime Minister. I just wonder how the West media sees him still. Is it still through the lens of his reformist legacy, what we call here reformasi? And he keeps chanting the words reform a lot. But how do you think he's performed so far?
Look, I think I wouldn't go so far as to judge what he's been doing recently. Again, not my place. I think what is noticeable is that you have had a succession of leaders who clearly have built up extraordinary experience in government. And that is in quite sharp contrast now with some countries in the West where they churn through leaders. And, you know, again, you don't make direct comparisons because populations and cultures are very, very different. But it's interesting to see leaders grapple with very complicated, often quite heterogeneous countries, try and hold a path and draw on their experience and their previous leadership experience to do so. And so that's what I watch in this country. Without, I have to say, I tend not to judge it that much because you need a lot of information to be able to come to a proper judgment, and I don't have that kind of information.
Okay. And as a sort of a prelude into what we're going to talk about in the debate tomorrow, it's going to be brought up, cost of living and the fuel subsidy rationalization, amongst other things, right? So in regards to the subsidy rationalization, Anwar has said that he's the only one who's stepped up. A lot of his predecessors, there was just all talk, but no one came around to actually putting the policy in place. Again, what's your take on that? And that, you know, he's finally doing what was supposed to be done decades ago.
Well, I think it is really, really difficult to withdraw subsidies. I mean, I think, you know, we know that. We see it in the West. We see it across this region as well, where I know that this is not the only country to have done things like fuel subsidies. We also know, economists tell us, that subsidies are fairly inefficient ways of helping the poorest because they help out the better off as well. So again, I would simply say, you know, nothing to do with my beliefs about subsidies, good or bad. It's very tough to withdraw them because there are always very powerful constituencies that want them kept for good or bad, and to get that done is a sign of some leadership in my book. Now, it's not that I'm approving or disapproving, but I can just see as a governmental task, it's quite hard. And to get it through, you have to say that's a function of leadership.
Yes, and he has said it, that he has to make the unpopular decisions, and if people don't like him for that, then so be it. Well,
I'm the last person anyone will accuse of being his spokesperson, so I'm just saying I can see that's quite a task to get through.
Yeah. And a little bit carry on to Anwar's not legacy, but what he's done so far in terms of foreign policy. What do you think about his how outspoken he is about the Gaza and the stance that we're taking on the Gaza war, particularly against Israel? How does that stand out, say, you know, between the other world leaders that you've covered so far?
It's interesting, and again, it's a sign of a kind of a new division, a different division in the world. I mean, the phrase "the global South" is a horrible one. It really is, because it suggests that there's one lump here and another lump there. But let's use it for the moment. You know, it's clear that on issues such as Ukraine and on Israel and the Palestinians, there's a fairly sharp division, or there certainly was at the beginning. And Malaysia's leadership has made its position very, very clear on Israel and the Palestinians, and seems to walk in step with its population there, that it seems to speak for many, many Malaysians in their unhappiness at what Israel is doing in Gaza. It's worth pointing out, you know, there is a shift also in the West as this war has continued, and more people feel uncomfortable and upset about what has happened. Again, not my place to judge it, but it is interesting that Malaysia has been so forthright, and obviously I think there is a reflection in the government as to what people feel within Malaysia about what's happening in Gaza.
What about the double standards that we've pointed to, say, when the Western media covers Ukraine and Russia, there's a different treatment, whereas when it comes to Gaza, how do you find that criticism?
Well, I without wanting to be really annoying, I sort of need to know what the specific criticism of double standards is. You know, the BBC in particular gets criticised from nearly every side on this topic, and I appreciate that very few people are because the topic is so polarising. Very few people are happy with the coverage that they see.
Okay.
What I tend to say to people is, look at the other side, look at the complaints that the other side have about our coverage as well, and bear in mind how strongly they are held when you point out that we are the devil or we have double standards. We are unable to get inside Gaza to report from Gaza. We would very much like to, but the Israeli authorities do not allow us to, which really restricts the reporting that we can do. We depend very heavily on first-hand reporting, on saying we are here and we are witnessing that. We can't do that inside Gaza. That does restrict what we're able to do. We're able to travel more freely, of course, in those parts of Ukraine that are still controlled by Ukraine. So on double standards, I'd be interested in what the specific criticism is, but I would also say all reporting is an art, not a science. Those who make claims to it for it to be a science are wrong. And whilst there will be mistakes that have been made, it is an effort always to find the closest thing you can get to the truth and to report again what each side says.
Yeah.
Great pleasure, real pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.